All right, welcome everybody. It's 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Today is the community practice meeting on discussing unmotivated workers. So I will go ahead and get things put in the chat here, but I will also get the code word announced. The code word for this month, since it's October, is pumpkin. So I will get stuff posted in the chat. As a reminder, if you can turn your cameras on, please turn your cameras on if you are able, and I will turn things over to Russell.
Great. Well, thanks, Jordan. Thanks everybody for coming or for being here today. I know you y'all are getting ready for your big week next week, I think, with the training, right? What do you call that, Jordan? Sorry. What's that? Fall conference, maybe?
Correct.
It's a big production, right? Like I know, which is awesome. So, so great. So it looks like so far we have a smaller group, and just to remind you, the community practice, I really do want to ask for. It's more of a discussion, I think. When we look at the slides, there's kind of prompts, and I'll share some information. But you know, with the community practice, none of it really is, but I think the idea is like, this is not the last word on anything. You know, it's more of sharing some stuff and some ideas, maybe some stuff we're all seeing, and sharing our own kind of expertise and insights and experiences. So just want to encourage as much participation as possible. And again, it's not like right or wrong. It's more kind of, hey, what do you think about this? You know, how do you feel? Or in your own words, how would you describe one aspect of what we're talking about. So I will share the screen here, and we're only together for an hour anyway, so it's not tons of time. Just wanted to have a conversation as much as possible. Okay, so so today, like Jordan had said, was motivating the unmotivated worker, and so I struggle professionally with the idea of motivation. I know I'm not an expert in it by any means, but I know a little bit about motivational interviewing, and we'll look at that a little bit today. But
Also, if I could, I just wanted to let you know Julie will be here. She just had to take one of our supportive people home quick.
Okay.
So she'll be here.
Cool, thank you. So motivation, I mean, we talk about, so a couple of questions just about the topic of what do we mean by that, which we'll go into it. I just want to make sure that when we talk about motivation, I think sometimes, or what unmotivated means, what is a worker, that kind of stuff. I think sometimes, I have not bumped into it in my work in South Dakota yet, but I just think that sometimes that's used almost sometimes as a readiness indicator, and I think sometimes as a reason, the most optimistic way of saying is, we're not sure how to engage where people are at. The most pessimistic way to look at it is used as almost a reason, a way out for us, because we don't know the answer, and so we end up blaming people sometimes. And so I think I've shared with everybody now, like I just throughout my work, I'm sure you have the same experience. We have these insights where you're like, oh, like that's a great example of like what we're talking about. And I think I've told everybody this happened like 2 weeks ago with the CIE training we wrapped up, and then the training topic. And then today that I recently worked with a young man who was interested in cooking culinary, and he didn't want us to go anywhere to a kitchen, and we were like, that's kind of odd, like what's going on there, right? Now it's kind of motivation, but we're trying to figure out what's going on. And it was really easy answer that he had been through stuff like that. He cooked at home and did, barbecues, other stuff. But when he did transition work, and then with his first providers before he was in the project we're in now, whenever he went to anywhere around food, he ended up doing the dishes, and that's it. And so I just felt like when we talk about motivation, I think a lot of it goes back to understanding, that if you want to say, well, he didn't want to work around, we thought the label was he doesn't want to work around food for whatever reason, but that really wasn't it. It was just that he had a specific experience over and over again. And, so working in that environment meant something to him that was different than it meant to us. And so, that's, I think, a lot of the motivational interviewing techniques are trying to figure that out, trying to figure out one person's point of view and their experiences, their history, kind of their universe, and compare that to maybe our perspective of that, and maybe we're trying to get at how the world really is, but it's because it's always seen through our eyes, through intermediaries, and it's filtered, and there's biases that, you can never get to a true, I think, definition of that. So I think that, understanding people's interests, concerns, difficulties, barriers, I think that's all part of it. So anyway, so that's what we'll talk about today. I saw the thing is pumpkin, and this is my favorite time of year. And so I've seen some really funny stuff on Twitter and all this kind of stuff. And so I do want to share. So I hope y'all enjoyed as much as some other people do. But I have none of my family likes scary movies, but my youngest, who's 11, Bodie, my youngest boy. And so we watched Friday. We watched Nightmare on Elm Street the other night. We watched Scream, and we watched the Halloween movie. So 3 of those 5. I'm not sure. I'm definitely not letting them see Friday the 13th. I know that really messed. I saw that in the theater. I think the second one way before I should have, and so it really messed me up. So I'm going to stay away from there. Maybe I'll watch it first. The Chucky one, I don't know too. That's kind of freaky. But Scream, I've forgotten how that first scene in Scream is just super, super awesome. And then Nightmare on Elm Street, really, it's a funny movie, kind of really clever movie. It's interesting to go back and watch those. For my kids, they're too slow. They just aren't cut fast enough. They don't move fast enough for what they're used to. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, so I wanted to ask, just again, have a conversation about, when we talk about worker, motivating the unmotivated worker. I think probably what we mean is there's probably a couple categories of that, right? There's probably somebody we meet before they're working, so prospective worker, potential worker, or soon to be worker, hopefully employee. Or if you want to take the literal meaning of that, it may be like somebody who's in a job. So I just, and these topics were selected by survey. So I just wanted to clarify that I think that there are multiple situations when motivation, in terms of initiation and interests, that is important. And I think that they can happen during the entire process, of course, and it can happen, years after the process. And so I think when we talk about motivation, I think that there are a lot of, we'll talk about it in a bit, but there's things I think that we can relate to, based on our experiences or experiences that people we love have had, or things that are just commonly known. For instance, all of us have had the experience when we typically may call it burnout or career growth or whatever, when we're in jobs and we're in the jobs for a while, and it's time to move on, and I just think it's interesting how we label that for us, of course. I think probably if we're true to ourselves, we say things like, I'm just not motivated. I just don't want to work anymore. But we don't really describe it like that. I think with, we talk about other things when it's time for us to personal growth, challenges, and I think those are all true. So, how you describe everything is true. So I think I just want to make sure that as we're talking, that we're talking about that. When one of the things that we want to make sure we understand is that you cannot motivate your way, out of a bad match, so a lot of times, I don't know of any data about it, but I'd say a large chunk of the times when we say motivation, what really is happening is that the job is not a great match. So the obvious one would be that when I just told you where I just don't want to be in the dishes anymore. That didn't mean he didn't want to work in that setting. It was just that those tasks, he wasn't even against that task in doing the task. It was just like whenever he was in a kitchen, that's all he did. He never got a chance to move on to the next thing. And so it's that's fair. I understand that, right? So sometimes, but I think a lot of times also when we're talking about motivation, or it's part of the pre stuff or the readiness or just getting to know people, which is when we meet people and maybe they're not working. We're getting to know them, or maybe they're working a little bit and they're looking for something else. So I think that a lot of times when the idea of motivation comes up, it's like when we're working with people to figure out what works and to start the process of employment. So, and I wondered, could I just ask, and again, in your own words, could just maybe two people, again, no right or wrong, but when you think of motivation, like how do you define that? Right? What does that mean to you? So just a couple of, maybe two volunteers, one at a time, if that's okay. Please.
I guess with the people that I work with, I have some clients who call me like on a regular basis saying they want to find a job, wanting to know what I found available, if I've gotten any interviews set up, that kind of stuff. And then I've got other clients who I have to constantly reach out to them to get them to do things. So when I think of motivation, I just think of the people who are actually reaching out to me and wanting and are showing that they actually want a job and to do the things necessary to get that job.
Great. Thank you, Kendra. One other person, please.
I have currently a person that I'm trying to keep motivated. She got the job she wanted, super motivated in the beginning, and then now that's kind of dropped off. And then she makes excuses why she didn't do something, kind of thing. So trying to figure out how to get her motivated to keep doing a good job.
Okay, great. So I'd like to come back to that later, if that's okay. Great. So I think, and I did not, I should have looked up the definition of motivation before I wrote that there. I don't know what the specific definition is, but I think all of us would probably come to some kind of notion of initiation, effort, like a discretionary effort, especially like when people decide for themselves. We're not told to do things, or they're not, they're initiating and motivating themselves, not having an external force. So we'd say something intrinsic, right, versus extrinsic. Cool. I just want to ask you this, and I when I wrote this, I kind of thought, well, it'll work, but I'm just curious in general, like when you think about like those things that you you don't need a lot of coaxing, or you initiate on your own, or that you have more effort when you do them. Like, what are some of the qualities? Like, what are some of the things that motivate you? And I don't mean just work, but it could be work too, but just in general. Like, what are some of the things that are present when you feel like you're really motivated? Right? Could be feelings, thoughts, people, places. I don't know. I'm just curious about that. And again, I love it. People definitely type, but also if you could talk to, that would be great. Just jump in. So for me, like one of the things that motivates me, if I think of intrinsically, is obviously if I'm good at the task, right? If I think that's part of it, if I feel competent, right? I think that's something that is important, is some kind of indicator as to whether or not I'm doing a good job, right? It could be, again, if I have something I've experienced with, then I can figure out myself. If it's something I'm new at, there probably would need to be some form of feedback, right? Again, it could be like, again, I think of basketball just because we're in sports mode, or there's this cool basketball hoop thing that they have at our rec center that it throws passes out to you, shoot, and it has a big net and it shoots it out to you, and you can do programs. It'll kind of tell you, you shot X%, great job. You're in this, it'll give you a feedback like that. What else motivates you?
I get motivated for things like problem solving or kind of puzzle like activities where I don't get as motivated for maybe more social activities. So there's jobs that I would hate because they're just social all day.
Yeah.
I like my job because it's a lot of kind of problem solving or a task that can be done and you check it off and you're done with it.
Yeah. That's great. I remember reading when I became, I think that's very, very interesting and very true, I think, for all of us in certain aspects. But I remember when we first found out my wife was pregnant with our first kid, I remember I get freaked out and read all the books I can. And one of the books was talking about how, like, when in the early days of parenting, it's just like, it's nonstop, constant. You don't really feel like you're accomplishing anything because you change a diaper and then you change again, baby's crying, great, and then she cries again, but I remember them, like the book I read, it was like the couple was arguing over who gets to clean the oven, which is a task we all probably hate, but in that, compared to like taking care of the baby in that instance, it was like a task that they both fought over because they wanted to do it because it was something, there was a clear start and a clear end, right? And you got feedback. Does that make sense? So I think that, yeah, for some of us, like knowing accomplishment, right? And some form of certainty sometimes, again, of when something's going to be, again, I think depending on the task, if you're more of the social, I think there are ways to find that there. Cool. Prizes, cash, and a good thank you, right? Cool. I think what motivates me too are people, and I think John mentioned that. So I'm clearly motivated. Like when I enjoy the people that I'm with, like if there's a team base or coworkers or obviously your kids or others who maybe share what I'm in similar interest or where I have a role or responsibility, right? I mean, I'm clearly motivated to get my kid to school on time, for a number of reasons, but okay. Cool. Anything else? Some of us motivate, some of us are motivated by, we like to learn new things, or we feel like we're solving a problem, like Nikita said. Okay. I mean, obviously, like prizes, cash, or money. It's clearly, if you think of work, I mean, that's obviously the number one reason why all of us are working. Some of us are motivated more, and some of us are motivated less. In terms of how much that means to us, right? No, it's not good or bad, whatever. Okay. Status sometimes, right? I mean, that's a very important thing, and not, again, whether we think it's good or bad, doesn't matter. In terms of how you're viewed, again, could be coworkers, just community in general, people you love and love you. Okay.
Russell?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
So I get really jacked up when I help somebody find their job and then I see them succeed at it and they're successful and they have natural supports and they don't need me anymore.
Yeah.
That's what gets me really excited about it.
Awesome. So cool. So in our work, yeah, I mean, that would be, that's kind of what we describe situations like that as like, that's the stuff you hang your hat on for like the rest of your career, because you're going to have some bad days too.
Right.
And it's really important to remember when that happens, right? To hold on to that. So, yep, those stories, I think that's a main thing too, is those stories where we can share, right? I think that's another thing too, is something we can describe to show the world, right? The kind of, I'm here, and I've made an impact, right?
Right.
So yeah, and that's kind of maybe related to status or like making a difference, right? Like, one of the things we talked, like you were talking about, John, with belonging, is I read something a while ago that was just that was like one of the main theories about, like, I know like men are really struggling in the world right now, with work and other stuff, and one of the things is that kind of the idea of belonging, of camaraderie, you know, of being necessary, right? I think because that's how they said it, being necessary, being needed, of people noticing if you're not there, right? And that ties back to relationships and purpose and a lot of the why. Like there's so much, you know, if you do any reading on HR, kind of on modern economics or modern life, you know, all these things are in there. But that's stuff, identity, that stuff is super, super important. I think in general. Okay, so why is this important? Of course, well, first of all, it's a topic, but secondly, I've shown this slide a few times. This is from 2019. And this is South Dakota Reasons for Unsuccessful Closures. If you look at I really think that like this motivation, or that there's, you know, there's some framing of it. Again, I've spoken my critique of motivation or my concern about using it as an out or to blame people or to shove it off on others, but clearly, the 677, they speak somehow to motivation if people aren't interested. If we talk about interests and receiving, like people wanting what we have to offer, like those people, that clearly probably can tie that to somehow to people. Again, motivation or people feeling like you know that again that we could be useful. Maybe, I don't know, who knows, we're speculating, but somehow motivation. And then the first one at 707, clearly, people aren't returning your calls or don't show up, you know, and those, I mean, so I think it's a pretty big topic in terms of, you know, a large, if you add that up, what's that? That's 1,384. So, I mean, that's probably, that's probably like over 80% maybe of the case, roughly 80%, or maybe, I'm not good at math, but so that's a big chunk of like why things aren't working. And again, like you look at each individual circumstance individually, the reasons are all over the place, I'm sure, but probably you're going to notice a trend of us and in the employment seeker, the referral, you know, us not figuring, you know, really, I think what motivation is, like I said, is it's understanding people's perspectives, that there's some disconnect between kind of where we are and what we're saying we have to offer and how people go about accessing it and using that. And then people kind of where they are, you know, and kind of how their lives are being lived and the barriers, challenges, that kind of stuff. So, you know, and I think that ultimately, again, this what I boil it down to is understanding the person, the employment seeker. And this is a slide I showed during the training. I think that oftentimes, like, and we'll come back to the person, I forget who had mentioned that person got the job they really wanted, and then they've lost some steam, right? So that's interesting, right? And it's interesting for being somebody who's on the outside, right? I can say that's interesting. For you, that probably is really, it's a really, the feeling of it is tough, I'm sure, and working through it. So I don't want to admit, I mean, it's a tough scenario. But ultimately, I think all of, you know, I think we one of the things I really do believe wholeheartedly, and we'll talk about it again in a second, is that people have their good reasons, you know, for who they are and their perspective on the world and their interactions with you. And I think that's part of it. You know, their good reasons may be based on partial pieces of information or a past experience that was kind of generalized, you know, or extrapolated to something that's maybe not accurate now, or a past experience that hopefully was just a one-off, or hopefully was something was wrong, or something didn't work out. There's all kinds of things, but I think that ultimately, you know, if you think about like who people are, and I think that we're going to have to figure out some way to understand people's perspectives. And then we talk about motivating the unmotivated worker. You know, there has to be a process of figuring out what that data is, right? And this is kind of from our perspective as somebody who's, you know, getting to know people. You know, when we get to know them, we don't know the whole story, right? Or when we first meet them. And even based on we're kind of, you know, because we're employment supports, we're not residential supports, our interactions are kind of limited and from a certain perspective. So I think that part of it is what we want to try to do is come to an understanding of how the person's making sense of of their world, right now. And so I think that part of our process is figuring out what data is relevant and important. How do we organize it and put it into context? That's assorted, arranged, and then that's the contextual, like what's the meaning, what's significant, for what we're talking about now, what's meaningful. And then there has to be some version of and presented visually or explained with a story is kind of the same thing where we're sharing that, our understanding of who people are. And what we're talking about, it's back to the person, it's to that person here, am I understanding that this has happened or that you view this as this? What does that, does that, to me, the way I'm understanding is it means X, am I right with that? Or, I think there's got to be a process of sharing. Here's my understanding of what we've learned so far. Is that correct? Is that close to your understanding? And the best way, of course, I think, is to put it in terms that are understandable. It's not just say, hey, here's data and it's organized this way or presented visually. It's to connect it to a cohesive kind of narrative and continuum. Because again, I think all of our interactions, all of the way we act or behave, can be based on, again, we have good reasons, we have good rationalities, rationalizations in our mind, and then there's a logic to it, right? It's based on kind of our best efforts towards, I think, towards kind of functional interactions or functional behavior, right? And so when we think about, there's a couple, the thing I've cut here, the Payout Matrix is from this first, so these two sites, one's from a UK site and this other one is I'm not sure where it's from, but motivational interviewing. I need to look at this site in a second, but if we think about again, it's kind of a cost benefit analysis. If we were to think of this matrix, so the pros of working, the pros of not working, the cons of working, the cons of not working. If we were to think through this for people who with disabilities are using systems, and those that aren't, what areas do you think where there may be kind of a contrast, right? What are, like, those of us that aren't using human services, the idea is we can't, there are some things we just don't experience, and we're not gonna, we can't know kind of, we can't digest how it, some of the barriers, some of the disincentives. If you look at these areas, like, where do you think the biggest difference is between people without disabilities and people with disabilities? Or the best way to say it, I think, is people who are receiving human services and people who aren't. Does that make sense what I'm asking? Like,
is it health insurance because they're able to get Medicaid?
Right. So that's one of the, I mean, in general, what I would say is one of the cons of working, that those of us who don't use publicly funded services or use a lot of them, and that we may not understand is how people can be punished by working, right? So a con of working that can be pretty significant is, like, if you were to add up SSI, maybe SSDI, whatever people are receiving, housing, subsidies like HUD support, SNAP benefits. If you were to add that up, what that is before you go to work, and then you say, okay, I go to work, I'm working, even if I think a good way to look at it is like start with full-time hours and then work backwards. And then you do a net return on that. Sometimes the net gain is something like $3 or $4 an hour, right? If people go to work full-time based on their previous situation if they weren't working, right? So I think those are things that, and those individuals, are again, in my experience, you hear the tough stuff about like milk in the system, or or like sometimes like loss aversion, which I don't know about any of that. My experience is that even if people can't rationalize it like completely or understand how the math works exactly, people get that they feel like they're putting a lot of effort and not seeing great reward, right, from going to work. And then there's the whole uncertainty of just benefit systems, right? Of like you were saying, Brenda, one of the cons of working is you'll oftentimes Social Security will screw things up, and you'll get like a kind of a scary letter from them telling them you owe them money. Even though you've done everything you can, maybe they lost the reporting. Or you get, oftentimes when people go to work, they'll get a letter saying, now we have to do a work evaluation or medical evaluation. And the reason that is because typically the Social Security system is so behind, they're so big, that you go to work and you send something to them, and it kind of jars them awake. And so they look at your case and they say, oh shoot, we should have done a medical review in 2012. So we got to get on that. What it feels like if you have services, even though it's not rationally connected, is it feels like they're watching you. Now they want to try to punish you. Even though it's not, it's because they're just behind. So I think that the cons of working, I think that is the costs of going to work. I think that's, to me, sometimes the biggest difference between kind of my life, the way it is now. I mean, we also, we had a big bill for, we had a big bill for the exchange last year for the insurance, because it's we didn't fit we took the tax credit, and then we just made a bit too much money, so that sucked. But so I can feel that, but it's not like a day-to-day thing, and it only happened in 1 year. It hasn't happened my whole life. I don't get letters threatening me, anything else like cons, pros of working, I think are roughly similar. Again, the reward isn't as big, but what are the obvious ones? You're around people, you're growing and learning, you have more money. Typically, you get more money, not the net isn't great. Pros of not working, I think, are again, this is kind of understanding people's motivation and kind of how they view work in general. It's very simple. Pros of not working, I think, are very similar. I think we could do what we want. We may not enjoy the work we've had in the past, right? So I think that's another thing too, is that people have had limited options, and so if we viewed work as being something that's completely mismatched to us, then that can be frustrating, or if we've not been treated well. To me, pros of not working is just I get to spend more time, with people, my family, pretty much, and maybe explore areas of interests that aren't, that aren't traditional. And then the other one, the cons of not working. I think that sometimes too that a lot of us work because we have responsibilities, and relationships, roles, where there are demands made of us. There's expectations, right? So I think, I know, like, I just think if you think of folks we serve, that I just think that, the lack of expectations, or even negative expectations, the lack of relationships and roles, I like the inexperience with good life, to understand that, like, if I don't work, then I'm not going to get some of these things. I think sometimes folks we work with, there's not a lot of, and again, this is global, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but there's not tons of like very fun stuff happening, and so I think that again, the difference between kind of what would happen to me if I didn't work, and what and what I wouldn't be able to access, and somebody who I've worked with sometimes who doesn't understand or had the experiences of all the stuff there is to stick in, to stick with it for. I think that's a difference too. So I want to show this others. Let me stop. Any thoughts about that? But again, this is like a simple tool that I think, to work people, and to just to think, it's a thinking tool really but I think to figure out kind of where people are coming from, it can be kind of helpful, just a simple cost benefit kind of analysis thing. So I'm going to stop share. I just want to show you the website real quick. Yeah, and Justine, that's really great. The benefits, people got to look at that. The only thing I'd say there is that it can be really hard to understand like all the benefit stuff for everybody. And so typically I find that people get it for a limited time, and then as time passes, it kind of falls out of your head. You know, I think I describe it as like it's the theory of relativity. Like I've learned that a couple times, but I just can't hold on to it. Like then I forget because we aren't
Well,
using it.
we
We
can send them back to them.
Awesome.
You know, if something's changed or a different job or
Yeah.
the wages changed, we can send them back and we can go through it again.
Awesome.
You know,
that's great. Most times what I find is like the report's done and then it gets filed somewhere, you know, and then it doesn't get used. So, so I thought, I mean, keeping that, you know, and being available to say, hey, if you have questions or new questions came up, I think what will happen typically is like when they start, they'll be like, oh, like, hey, this is great. This is general. So this is what happened today. And then now there's a job that we're talking about, right? And so now it's specific, right? So now you can have conversations about how many hours you're working, you know, dollars per hour. And now we can break it down to a T. So like it's like we're giving you information and awareness of this stuff, but now it's time to use it. And that's that second part that doesn't happen as often as we'd like. So awesome. Okay, sorry, let me show you this. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to teach motivational interviewing, but today, but it just, you know, you can look at these sites. And again, a lot of it, if you went through the CIE training or you've been through customized employment training, it's a lot of the same stuff, right? It's like understanding people, or I talk like about solidarity or accompaniment, this idea that we're trying to get to know people. I like the guiding side of communications is between following and directing. And we want to empower people, obviously, because it's got, you know, it's got to come from the individual eventually, you know, ultimately respectful and curious. So I love the idea of you know, beyond like telling people what to do or you know, telling people that's not it or you shouldn't do that. You know, it's really trying to engage with people as an equal partner, which is right there. Refrain from unsolicited advice, confronting, instructing, or directing, or warning. It's not a way to get people to change or a set of techniques to impose on the conversation. It's pretty cool. And so particularly useful when people, and ambivalence is high, confidence is low, desire is low, importance is low. In terms of how ambivalence high about how people feel about things, confidence is low in terms of you know, what they've done in the past that's been impactful. People don't know about or uncertain about how change would happen. And again, benefits of change and disadvantage of the current situation are unclear. I think that's a lot of that is just people don't have tons of experiences, or they've had some bad experiences, maybe heard some. So again, you can see like you can do, I'm sure, like if you look up, you could probably do a 40-hour course just on this, and it's one of those things that's pretty interesting. And so those two links are in there. But to me, again, I just think it's about understanding and then doing something with that understanding. So, okay, so I wanted to ask, this is the last slide, just wanted to go through this and ask y'all to share. So what are some common motivation difficulties before employment? What are, if some folk, a couple of y'all could just share share that, like stuff that you see kind of you've seen a few, you know, not a one-off, stuff you see kind of you've seen repeatedly.
Getting people to commit. Can you hear me?
Oh, yep.
Yep. Okay. Getting people to commit to, let's say, going to do assessments or job shadows. I think they're unsure, or maybe they've been unemployed for so long that they're afraid of what this is really going to look like. So, you know, just getting them out there and showing them what's available sometimes is hard.
Okay. Now, and again, I think I'd like to, if it's okay, I'd like to ask you and others for that, so that commitment or the beginning engagement, and you kind of hit on it, but what would be some of their, do you think, or that you've learned or they've told you, some of their good reasons for their reticence or their difficulties?
It's going to be a change.
Uh-huh.
It's going to be a change in their life.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily want to get up that early in the morning. It doesn't mean you have to work that early. Just what are others expecting of them? Expectations. They don't know what those are from other people. Maybe they're afraid of that.
Okay, so one is just kind of maybe general, like this is a new situation, I'm not sure about it, I'm going to get into. Okay, so when that happens, what are some what are some responses to that? And sorry to walk you through that. If that comes up, how can you? What are some ways of just in general, this is going to be something new, I don't know about this. Like how can we work through that? I guess
For me, I like to let them know that if you've never done it, how are you going to know? How are we going to figure this out? So I'm going to be right there with you every step of the way. And you can let me know at any time if this is uncomfortable for you, but everybody, including me, comfort, stretch, panic, there's things that are uncomfortable for everybody. So I guess just trying to give them that sense of comfort and that I'm right there, that this shouldn't be painful.
Okay, yeah, cool. Well, I think that learning anything new is definitely painful. It's just it is, right? It's in terms of frustrating, you're not good at it. Nobody likes that. I think that's part of it. And I think you can't get around that no matter what. The uncomfortability of those new people there. I mean, some of us are just natural, but I think most of us are there's a bit of a anxiety so I think that part of that is, but I like you're saying, well, it's you're going to be there, right? So you're or so there'll be support there. Okay, great. What about the getting up in the morning thing? That's interesting. It's a bit more complicated, I think.
Okay, I have a gentleman that there's a certain time that we're not going to do anything until we pass that time.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, there's just some people that are not morning people, and let's say the assessment should be done in the morning because that's when the business wants the assessment done.
Yeah.
Not happening. He's
right.
not getting up, and he's not ready until 11 or 1 o'clock.
Yep.
So,
and so what are some of the good reasons? Again, and this is when I mean good, sometimes what I mean is sometimes okay. So when I talk about good reasons versus sometimes how we view people, somebody you're at the grocery store and somebody loses their temper, right? And you're like, oh, that person, they shouldn't. But then if I lose my temper at the grocery store, I'm like, well, that person was rude to me, or I was blown off seat, right? Does that make sense? So if we're going to put, I don't want to get up early in the morning through that prism of if that were us and we were going to justify that, what may be some good reasons for that?
For some people, anxiety or, might be a lot worse in the morning or a different time of the day. And I know we've worked with that with some clients with what jobs should they and should they not apply for because of how things fluctuate throughout the day.
Yeah. I mean, it's just I'm not, I'm not a morning person. That's kind of, and then if you explore it, there could be some. Probably, I'm guessing the person has tried things in the mornings, right? And they haven't worked out, and so typically people have kind of adjusted to what fits them. What we would then need to do would be to accommodate our services for that person. So, okay, it's not out until afternoon, or whatever. One person we're working now is just his medication he takes really, the mornings aren't good because of that, and it wouldn't be good for him to take it during the day because of this same reason. So we understand that. We're trying to figure out exactly kind of where, so part of the toughest things is that not a lot's been expected of him. So it's hard to say exactly where kind of that point is, right? So he stays up late, like we're trying to talk to him, like, would it be possible for you to go to bed a little earlier? Could we work on that? Again, but just,
But for the person that doesn't want to get up early, whatever his reason is or her reason is, that's good enough for them. It's,
yep.
what's going to send you in the direction of wanting this job? What's really the driving force? Do you really want this job, or do you want some job that's in the evening because you're just not going to do it?
Right. And that's the point. Yeah, exactly. Is that helping people understand that if part of their work availability is limited by that, then it's just going to create maybe less opportunity or reduced opportunity. And just help working through that. But that's exactly right. Like, all of us probably had experiences where it's like, well, what if we create this job? Would you be willing to, negotiate, you're negotiating, could we work on some of the things that you say are tough or maybe less negotiable? Cool.
Also, some people don't sleep well at night, and that can be an alternative to taking medication that's going to make them feel tired or hungover the next day, where they just can't function.
Exactly.
So they choose to sleep in longer to be able to get the sleep they need to be able to function without being on a bunch of medication.
Yep. Great. And again, like if you were to talk with that person throughout, there would be probably a really relevant story there, right? About how that came to be and how it's worked for them, so yeah, great perspective or insight and information. What else? Okay, so it's like, so it's just, hey, well, one of the things, like, if they're concerned about environment, you could, and I'm sure you do this, is like, hey, we could go check it out if you want, like go talk to a few people, just go walk through there, if they're an assessment or another thing. Is there a way, would we be interested in doing that? One of the other things I think I've seen, and people don't specifically articulate it, but if it's not paid, I think that is a good reason. Like, I don't, want to go do some stuff and not get paid to do it. Like, okay, I get that. Again, like from our, we may kind of in our brains think, well, you're not really doing anything that's getting compensated anyway, right? But that's kind of from our brain, right? That may not be a good reason. May not make sense, based on that person's perspective. Okay. Anything else about before employment that we see?
I have seen recently with some individuals that I've worked with that are also mental health clients. They come in ready to be cooperative in a sense and follow recommendations that I make. But then, of course, some of the individuals, they do have a personality disorder to where their mood fluctuates. So then there may be a day or a few days that go by, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I start my job at so-and-so place, and it wasn't brought in discussion during our meeting. And not that that's bad at all, because I definitely encourage my clients to be independent in a sense, but it's the complete opposite from just like we were talking about, if you're a morning person or afternoon, or the environment can sometimes affect an individual. And at that point, then we're kind of starting over. But at the same time, ironically, it creates a great learning experience for the individual, because then they can understand, okay, so this is why we talked about A, B, and C when we first met. So it kind of, even though it's a negative, in a sense, a negative situation that the individual is going through, it ends up being a positive situation because, like I said, it turns it into that learning experience.
Yeah. So just to restate, and let me know if I'm off here, you're saying that sometimes folks you work with, you may not learn certain things about them that then come up later. Is that what you said? Or am I interpreting that? And then they impact the job, like a preference that maybe they didn't tell you about? Or
More, it's kind of the opposite. They come
sorry.
in, no, you're okay.
Sorry.
They come in saying, you know, this, like, I'm not a morning person, but I would like to do this kind of job. And then I go, okay, let's look for some modified placement out there, or maybe a position that I could help you influence, modify with the employer. But then, you know, a week goes by or a couple days go by and they go for that exact job that they described, and they realize, okay, yeah, this is why I didn't desire to go for this said position. Like, just, and I don't want to say it's completely because of their diagnosis, but like with working at Lewis and Clark and being a mental health facility, I do have to keep that in mind, even though I don't want that to be a sole focus when I'm working with an individual. But I do need to remind myself that, you know, this individual's mood might fluctuate at a certain time and could be triggered by certain events going on, that's something we also need to take into consideration when it comes to job placement.
Okay, so there was, and again, I just want to make sure I get this right. I'm so sorry.
You're okay.
It's a Thursday. I'm not Friday yet, so I don't have an excuse. But what you're saying is that there's some qualities of the job that weren't identified when they thought fit them, or maybe they didn't know about, and then they get in the job and it doesn't fit them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because right away they're like, okay, here's a job opportunity. I want to grab onto it.
Right.
And really, we need to talk through it, make sure A, B, and C fits with their personality or triggers or anything like that, as far as the mental health side of things. Because then, of course, we already know, and I go into every meeting already knowing this individual is going to be capable of working. That's the mindset that we go into. But there's also those other factors we have to take into consideration too, so we can be successful in the job placement.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so the other thing you're saying is that, and what I heard is that there could be many reasons why that happens. But one reason could be, like you mentioned, like that they just maybe didn't have insight or overlooked somehow, like some interaction between the job or the task or whatever and their support needs.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So two things there. Like when you think of one, maybe what would be the good reason they didn't have insight? Well, probably they didn't have experience, maybe in that specific place. So what you're saying is perfectly awesome, which is, of course, we'll figure this out. We just got to make sure it fits, right? And how do you do that? So that's kind of a employment services process. And then the other one is, I definitely had the case where people haven't shared everything, they haven't let me in on certain things. And when I get over like the feeling of, gosh, like, that sucks. Like you didn't trust me, or I'm bad at my job, or being pissed off at the person because they've, whatever, all my bad lizard brain things. I realized that the person probably had a really good reason for not sharing some of that stuff with me. Right. And have you ever, and some of those in my experience have just been how they've been treated, or how they've been looked at, or how people change, and so that's a good reason. And you're talking about after employment, like those are, it's experience and services, but also, some of the stigma or just biases that they've experienced in their life, that maybe they didn't know you. So why would they tell you some stuff? Okay, great. So the example that I'm sorry, I forget your name, when you said that somebody started a job and it was like the job, but then now their motivation is waning. Could you talk, again, you don't have to have no specifics or, but could you talk a little bit more about that? Would that be okay? I think that's something that happens that all of us could agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's you, Jessica. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're okay.
Great.
So that individual that I had, I met with her probably 3 or 4 times before she had found this job. She had actually heard of the job through a friend. So the friend's influence was there, where they were saying, hey, my dad works here. I think you would like it. It's easy work. So then that motivation, I think, changed for this individual of, okay, well, if it's something easy and I can get paid a little above minimum wage, and I'm still going to be able to work within the benefit limitation where they don't lose any benefits of any kind. They're kind of right in the middle. So you have not losing benefits, you have quote unquote easy work, and then somebody familiar that works there that you already knew before becoming employed. Sounds great. So I provided the support for her. We did a couple check-ins. And then after a good check-in, a good report, the next day I got a text from her saying that she left that job. Coincidentally, it turned into her physical medical health wasn't going very well. So that then triggered her mental health that she had going on. And she does have a mood disorder. So then, of course, that triggers into, well, I'm not going to be able to get up in the morning. I'm not going to be able to work this entire shift. And then she kind of spiraled a little bit. So a big benefit that I have with my job being at Lewis and Clark is immediately I can have the direct contact with our mental health team. So we had made that connection and come to find out that there is a little extra more stuff going on that, again, she felt more comfortable talking to individuals, a part of her team that she's had for a while, as opposed to where I'm somebody new. So then when I found that information, I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And why she chose to jump to that job that she did, even though it's a complete opposite characteristics or environment than what she initially came into services with me talking about. So essentially she's still not employed, but positive is that her medical health and mental health are doing much better. And part of that did get triggered from the environment she was in also at work. So we did a follow-up and she had a lot better insight at that point, because she said, you know what, I should have listened to you. I should have followed your recommendations. I go, you know, that happens. It happens to everybody. And that, you know, it's a big learning experience, but now you know what we could do differently for you to be successful when you decide to be, you know, looking for employment again.
Yeah.
So it's like her motivation was there. She was on board. She was all for it, got into work. I'm doing good. And then all these other factors that I think often, you know, maybe some of our individuals who maybe, and I'll take it back. She is one that hasn't worked for a really long time, like 8-10 years, long time. So there were a lot of things that we could have helped her learn or educate her on before she got into said position. But of course, her motivation was like 100 and she went for it right away. So again, I think all comes back to the learning experience that she's now able to go off of from that situation.
Cool. Yeah, great. So yeah, that's tough. You know, it's like slowing things down a little bit, doing some like you just said, Justine said, you know, experience, exposure, education, all trying to figure out kind of how the actually specific job fits where you're at right now. So cool.
Right.
And we're running out of time. But I just think it also is insightful to think about, you know, as somebody in our job that we interact with a bunch of people, of just understanding ourselves and you know, some of the things that you struggle with. And we don't have time. I was hoping to hear a bit from you, but for me, like in terms of I know I struggle when people, and it's not just the employment seeker, but others, when people think there's like only one way to go, you know, like I want that job. I really struggle, and a lot of it, I think I understand why that happened. A lot of it's obviously based on previous, like I just want to work at McDonald's, that kind of stuff, or whatever. Usually it's based on what people know, you know, our ideas about what they've been exposed to in the past, whether it's high school or other training programs. But I think that is, you know, and I think that doesn't really relate to what you were saying, Jessica, but I think like well, there's a job, I'll just go get a job. And I know in my brain that, man, that is just not likely to work if we don't do a little bit more. For a lot of people, I've really wanted to look into it. And so I guess I don't know that it's hard. I do, like, I understand, but I felt like if I understood it better, if I felt it, that I would do better at engaging it. I feel like that to me is like, I know the thing that I really struggle with of helping people see that there are options, if they do have options, you know, that there are other ways to go about things. The version of like scarcity versus abundance, you know, kind of, but you understand where it comes from, of course. And so anyway, well, a lot of great comments. So thank you very much. And thanks for your participation. It's about 1. So really enjoyed it. And I hope you all have for those of you that are going, have a good week next week. And thanks so much, everybody. See ya.